Okay, so let's just do a quick introduction of who we are. I'm Dave Rowland. I'm the head of technology at the Auto Squadron group, which has Prism and Tracktion. Fabian?
I'm Fabian. I'm a contractor.
Paul. I'm Paul. I'm tech lead for Focusrite Innovation.
I'm Jules. I'm famous for JUCE and stuff like that. Anna?
I'm Anna, a freelancer as of August, but I used to work for Ableton before. I was the tech principal of the Max for Life team.
And hopefully we all have strong opinions about stuff. And that's...
Okay, whilst...
yeah, I get opinionated about unit testing and Git history.
Well, there is a couple of those up there.
Yeah, people used to be opinionated about processes in Ableton, so...
It's what you want us to discuss.
Yeah, what's first?
Okay, whilst the votes are coming in, I'm going to give that a minute, and we're going to just do a quick roundup of tabs v spaces, because we have to. Does anyone prefer tabs over spaces in this panel?
I come from the Python community, so I'm very used to spaces, and I set up my editor to automatically, switch tabs into spaces.
Well, every editor should be set up like that.
Sure, but also, so when I was a part of the Max for Life team, we were working on the, well, not in the intersection. We were actually always working with two code bases, the large, massive Ableton Live code base, and, a 30-year-old, mostly C-based Max code base, which uses tabs, like one tab. So you have every day, you're in this dual environment, and so my opinion became I started in this I wanted to be understanding the reasoning behind making these decisions on both sides, but the lack of consistency just makes you want to cry every day. It's really tricky. You can set up your editor, but I'm just the lack of consistency is
Could someone not just go through and change them all and commit,
right.
and then everyone moves on with their life?
I mean, you may not be realizing the scale of the project.
Okay, so we're going to move on quickly, but sorry, I should have mentioned before, because most of these are multiple choice kind of answers, the link in the right-hand corner enables you to vote on the outcome. So if you go to that one, we'll see if we've got any.
So yeah, come on,
any people
put your
voting.
votes in.
It's similar to last year.
Really,
still 25%
they aren't still here, are they?
tabs.
Oh,
yeah.
Come on, really?
That's 17 people voting, so that is science there. That's yeah. Okay, right. Let's see what we should talk about fully. So the first one is C++ successor. I know this was going to happen. How do we want to tackle this? I think this is going to be quite a big topic. Who has been following this relatively closely? Okay. So I've got some pretty strong thoughts on this, but just to kind of overview what these languages are, because they're not all obvious.
I have a quick question. Why do we have Herb Southern at Jules Storer?
So from left to right, we have Carbon, which is the new, it's not exactly Google, but there's some senior Google people that are working on it. That was announced at the Canadian C++ conference, I think. That's getting some good traction. CPPCon, Herb Sutter announced his CPP Front project, which is a syntax 2 for C++. So it is C++, but a new syntax. There's Circle, which is Sean Baxter's C++ compiler, and what he's effectively doing is just implementing every proposal that comes up to get some kind of airspace for it, so people can get a feel for what it looks like. Then we have Val, which is Dave Abrams and Sean Parent's, I think, language from Adobe, which is, from what I can gather, it's kind of a bit like Swift, but very, very strongly based on value semantics. Jacked I included because it gets spoken about a lot, occasionally, but I don't know too much about it. That's the language inside of the Serenity OS. And I put C++ up there in case you think we shouldn't mess with it. Let's carry on. So, does anyone have any favorites here?
Well, didn't we decide last year that the successor to C++ is Rust?
Is it a successor, though? Was it designed...
It's different. It's not. I can't migrate half my code base to Rust and then gradually migrate the rest over. Whereas that's what these guys are going for.
to these?
Yes, yeah, like certainly some of them, yeah. That is the idea. Like Carbon, I think, which is probably my favorite that I've seen, although they all feel a bit odd to me when I look at them. But certainly they're compatible. You can include your C++ and add some Carbon and just mix it all up. And
I'm going for Wszeborowska here because I like the idea that it's a subset of C++. So it's almost like Rust safe. So you could write all of the stuff that's not performant. You could write in Wszeborowska's sort of C++ version. It's checked by the compiler, but there's not a huge learning curve because there is a learning curve, but I think it's very, very most similar to C++ what I've seen. And yeah, it really naturally extends. So if you want performance, you just don't use that subset.
It looked a bit clunky to me when I looked at that. I don't know, I guess you get familiar with something if you use it for 30 years or so.
I'm just a big fan of Wszeborowska. That's really the only reason. Just does great work.
You got a favorite, Anna?
I don't know, my immediate answer, response to this is sort of, is it okay to say I don't care?
Yeah, that's a perfectly valid answer.
Actually where I'm coming from is, I don't know, after observing the transition from Python to the Python 3, I'm just not very optimistic, to be fair. It takes a long time. It's very hard to, some projects just declared we're not porting, or we're starting over and stuff like that, right? So I'm maybe more interested in observing how C++ changes because I think it's there to stay. It's all, I appreciate the advancements, but I'm very, very skeptical about this.
Yeah, is the question, what do we think should be the successor, or do we think the successor will be? Because I think I agree, I don't think it's going anywhere. These are all really nice ideas, but are any of them going to get the momentum they need to really?
Well, none of them have got the install base of C++ as a standalone language. It's so ubiquitous that it'd be hard to replace it.
Yeah.
So it's for that reason that I think if any of them succeed, CPP front will, the second syntax. I'm not sure if it will go through the proper standardization process because that's been tried before with epochs that kind of unanimously people are like, that's too, we don't want a fork have two different syntaxes or multiple syntaxes of C++. I do like it the most in terms of style. It's very familiar if you're used to C++, and it's incredibly terse. If it works with tooling really well, which I'm not sure yet, that'll be good, but it is one of the reasons for building it is to make it better for tooling. Circle is a great idea, and I think it needs to be in play, but I don't think it will get adopted widely because it's just too much. There's so much noise, so many different ways to use it. It's more of an experiment than a kind of serious language. Carbon is an interesting idea. If CPP front wasn't around, I think it would probably have some legs, but it focuses on tooling to an extent that makes the language very unlike C++. And I think that's probably going to put quite a lot of people off. I sort of feel if you're going down the Carbon route, you might end up going to Rust because
that's the thing, though. That's why I kind of think that one's actually got some legs, is because it looks a bit like Rust. And what you find is most of these new dialects, they're all doing the same thing like Rust, swapping the name and the type around. Everyone's like name : type these days. And it feels like anyone who came to Rust and liked that approach and then looked at Carbon could go, oh, actually, I could live with this in the C++ world.
But the other thing I like about CPP front is at the moment, I don't know if there will be a proper compiler, but it's a transpiler. So you still have your C++ code. If it fails, it might look a little bit gnarly, but it's quite nice that you can just write in a different syntax and it will generate the C++ for you. So you've kind of got that fallback. If you end up writing loads of Carbon code and it fails, you haven't got that anymore. And transpiling has proven successful before with TypeScript and things like that. And C++ was transpiled originally.
So if someone was about to start a new pet project, audio project, and had this luxury of choosing their own tooling and language they wanted to explore, which one would you recommend actually in the context of audio applications?
I wouldn't recommend any of these. I'd recommend a new C-based language. Well, yeah, maybe there's a question about that. If I was going to recommend one of these, it would probably have to be C++ still at the moment. I think the rest are too fresh, and I don't think you need any of the features that are in.
I did just start a new project with a fresh start. I could have used anything, and we used C++.
Can I throw in a curveball? I don't know. Is Swift a C++ successor?
I would say Swift is a Objective-C successor. I don't know. Although they do have this project, don't they?
They have performance annotations, and we were talking about large code bases, large user bases. All of these projects don't have large user bases, except C++. And Swift has a huge user base, has industry backing, and they have just now these performance annotations, which makes it almost everywhere real-time safe. They're working on it.
And they do have this interoperability project where you can literally pull in a C++ file and use stood vector.
So this toy code, I was just writing some toy code for me personally, and I just tried using Swift.
Mm-hmm. So. I do actually think that Swift is a possibility. I should have put it on this slide.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say we didn't talk about the other two, which I didn't
So I don't know
what
much about Val. To me, it kind of looks like Swift because Dave Abrams, I think, worked on Swift, so the syntax looks familiar, but it's based on value semantics, so it drops all the kind of like pointery referencey things. Jacked, I don't know much about either. Do you want to speculate on them, or should we any more comments, or should we see what the votes are?
Let's see what everyone else thought.
There's one comment, sorry to interrupt. There's one comment from a Zoom participant. Hi, I'm back here.
Oh, hello.
Nobody sees me online. I'm Kathy, I'm the volunteer for this session. And Domenico in Zoom asked, what about Zig?
Zig? Oh yeah, we haven't talked about Zig. I really like the idea of Zig.
I do like the idea of Zig. What
I really like about it is the way that Zig is its own build system and everything all in one little executable. I think that's really neat. And I think if I could have a fantasy C++ successor, it would have that same feature of just like, it's just the one thing and it just does everything for you.
The thing with Zig is I don't think it's got interoperability the same way as CPP Front or Carbon has. It's like the Rust version where you have to declare stuff.
Zig is a C successor.
Yeah.
And a really good one.
Okay, so we do have some votes. Most people still think C++ is going to stick around for a long time. Carbon in second and then CPP Front. I think this would be an interesting question to come back to in a year and see if the balance has shifted a bit.
See if they might have all disappeared by then.
Yeah, might be a shorter list. Okay, so what are we going to talk about next? TDD versus no testing. So you added this one, so you can kick us off.
TDD? Right, so I think, I tend to get very opinionated about how much to test, and I'm usually in favor of testing more. Also, you can argue that this is something I'm used to also coming from like other communities where people tend to test more without the, especially in dynamically typed languages, because I think a lot of people coming from the C++ community use this. Could speculate if that's a good argument, but use this argument, I don't have to test this because I have a compiler to catch these problems for me. So I'm used to testing a lot, and I see a lot of benefit of doing it the test-driven development way. There are obvious benefits to it, but let's reiterate, it's I was quite surprised when I got into TDD how the design of your code changes. They completely make different decisions, and I once attempted at a workshop that was showing that, asking people to whiteboard a solution and then actually do it that TDD way. And the solution was a few classes talking together in one and stuff like that. You have a lot of state, and you designing how they communicate. And then when we did it in the TDD way, we had two pure functions, which was, I don't know, it was really interesting to do this exercise. So that's one thing that I think is important when you do TDD, how it makes you think about your design. And the second thing is that I'm a big advocate for using tests for documenting your decisions, your code, helping people find entry points to your code base through the tests. And when the code base is very well tested, it feels easy to, try to approach it this way, especially if it's a big code base you don't know. I remember when I joined the push team at Ableton, it's a the communication layer between, like, the control surfaces and Ableton Live is written in Python. And this code was really well tested. And when I was new to this code base, and it was quite large and complex, I was expressing what I wanted to implement as my expectation in the test and letting the tooling navigate me where to put what to design it. And I found it like very useful to to use as an entry point to the code base I had no idea about.
So you start a new project. Are you saying you will enforce write test first, like hardcore TDD, write test first, 100% test coverage? Is that what you think, or are you slightly more pragmatic about it?
Yeah, more pragmatic. I don't think 100% coverage, test coverage is sometimes worth the effort, but like still like 90. I'm talking about 90 and not like 50, right? So it's like sometimes it really is like, okay, there's an overkill to actually go that far to aim for 100 sometimes.
If you step away from TDD and you go BDD, then you get 100% coverage for free, because just by definition of the way you're writing your tests. And I think it's a hard journey to get there. To go from nothing to TDD to BDD is a big step for a developer. But I think the benefits of going that route are so huge, because you're not always going to be the person maintaining that code. There's going to be other people who come in and their tests give you maintainability on that code, and they guarantee that you're documenting it in the same way, so we can get rid of comments as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you make this distinction, because I somehow squashed the two together in my head. Like the way I write my tests, I'm quite sparse with expressing my expectations, right? So in the end, hopefully I'm achieving similar things. Maybe, I don't know, would you like to give people more context about what you mean by...
Yeah, so BDD would be more given when then
exactly,
type tests.
Behavior
Whereas TDD, so you're testing the behavior of your classes, functions as black boxes, and you're defining them as inputs. Given an input, you expect this output. And the internal state, the end state should be, you should be able to rip out the entire internals of the function and replace it with something new, but you still meet the input and output expectations. And that kind of guarantees that your systems are very minimalist in what you write. So you should never write any code that's not directly being tested, and you should never write any code that's not being executed.
Is anyone strongly against testing?
Anyone? Yeah. I'll put something out. I mean, I think so. Just because we should have different opinions, so I think I like tests. But I mean, one thing is that JUCE has notably very little unit tests, and I think the reason is I think the team has tried, but I think the reason where it gets hard is when you're doing a high-level library wrapping low-level functions, where often it's just, oh, the MIDI open device call on Windows is called this, on Mac it's called this, on Linux it's called this, and they have all different types of parameters, and the way they behave might be subtly different, but it's really hard to test for that, because one might say you need to mock it out, but then you don't really know exactly the behavior of that Linux API versus the Mac API. And so for projects like that, I think, which JUCE really is a lot, I mean, there's a lot of just wrapping low-level OS calls. I would love to know how to really test that well.
That's a good question. It's also maybe ties to the question, at what level you test, what you test, and so on, like what you mock, what you don't want to mock, and stuff like that, I guess. I go out of my way to mock, and which maybe get me back to the question, who would not want to test? Well, project owners, because they're like, just push it, like, time pressure, push it. And I say, like, no, it has to be solid. And I was like, no, you don't, like, be faster. You don't know how to be fast. Like, I was, what? Like, so basically, it's good to have, like, very good arguments, to, like, tell product people that this is important, like, how to sell. Do you have, like, selling, I don't know, points?
I mean, the thing is with tests is generally, yes, it might take you longer to get to a deliverable, but that code's solid. It's not going to change after that.
Yeah, but what's your pitch for a product person?
Is that it will cost you time up front, but you'll save double that on regressions later.
They're a product person. They're not going to care.
No, 100%. But I literally had these sort of clashes, like, you know, or like collaborating with teams across the company, and I was pushing for having integration tests very early, even if half the stuff is mocked. But it was surprisingly hard to persuade people that this is how we should be working because of the time pressure, because of other priorities.
Controversially, should a product manager or a product owner be telling engineers how to engineer a product?
Do you even have to tell them you're doing tests? Just say, look, it's not ready yet. It'll be a week. Oh no, we're working on that.
You say the code isn't written because the tests haven't been written yet. So I've got to write the test before I do. That's just how you program, right?
The one thing I'd say about testing is testing's great. Like, and when you're writing something like our compiler, it's all test. But whenever I've done any user interface stuff, you look at it and go, oh, how am I going to test that?
Oh, this is, that's a very good
And that's where it all starts to get you. That's where I've gone off.
It's not like there's an end-to-end library that Focusrite might have open sourced last year, and Joe did a whole talk on it that integrates well with JUCE and lets you poke in using JavaScript.
Maybe you should go to YouTube and watch that.
Yeah, okay, I have like one more suggestion.
Yeah.
Because I've been in meetings, like work meetings across companies, where very helpful people, like, you know, we have like estimation sessions, and some helpful people are like, today. That's a day. And I'm like, no, it isn't. No, it's more. And then, like, you know, because everybody just wants to sort of show to their, I don't know, managers, product people or something that it's a simple problem. It's like, what about testing? What about code reviews? What about, like, you know, there's a process around it that we want to have in place. So please don't be this person who says it's a day.
So that person in our company is called Jules, but it's not a day. It's not a day, it's an hour.
And it's always wrong. I'll never learn.
Yeah, it's interesting. So right at the beginning, you mentioned that doing tests does change the way you write code. And I've noticed that. You get into this almost, it's a bit cheesy, but kind of this meditative state where you're kind of writing tests, and it kind of feels like a very different flow. And I think it does push you towards more functional and purely functional elements. I think for libraries, like we have a very big front-end library. We use a lot of integration tests there for testing kind of big chunks of it in one go, but then breaking things where possible into smaller, more functional libraries is how we tend to work. So it's a very pragmatic approach to testing, but I do like knowing that there are tests there, especially when you're refactoring.
Yeah, 100%, but like,
Yes, there is one. Will any other language out of C++ be compatible with existing frameworks or SDKs? Example, JUCE and VST3 SDK.
I think we've got a time lag. I think there's a big delay buffer going on.
Apologies, that's on me.
Yeah, I have a question for all of you. Is testing fun for you? For everyone, yes.
I don't like it.
Like, genuinely, when you get into BDD and TDD, it's super fun to write code like that because you only end up with code that works. You don't sit there going, what is going on here?
I do think it's fun in the way that it forces you to think about how you want to use that code first, because you tend to write code that says, oh, I want my function call and object to look like this, and then you have to implement it. So it's kind of a bit back to front, which can be fun.
for me, I sympathize more with people who say that writing tests first, doing things TDD way, is good because you're not left with writing tests at the end. So I don't know if I would consider writing tests fun, even though I'm strongly for
But was that
TDD.
the question? Writing tests, I don't think is fun, but using tests is fun because you do the hard work at the beginning, writing the tests, and then hitting your tests, and they go green and green after. That just it motivates me a lot to sit through a project.
But it's not the bit I enjoy. I enjoy the actual coding, not the test writing.
Okay, we're going to have to get to some form of resolution.
Yeah, mocking everything's
we're
so
nearly-
fun.
Okay, let's see what we got. So, okay, most people are somewhere in the middle, but still a good chunk for TDD, which is good.
Yeah. But also, what's in the middle? I always struggle with this.
So
thing. What's in
TDD,
the
I would
middle?
say writing your tests first and aiming for 100% test coverage. I'd say somewhere in the middle.
There is a question to the other team, I guess.
So it's not me doing that single node testing mode, but it kind of relates to my question because what kind of annoys me about this, the evangelists of TDD, is the assumption that you can always test your code, that you actually can write your code in a way that is fully testable, which for me, especially working in audio, if you look at, for example, concurrency, like the RCU talk that we heard earlier, how do you even write unit tests? You can't write unit tests for this that actually reliably cover this. You can, what you really need to do, you need to kind of understand your code. You need to make sure on a mathematical level that it does work, but you can't really test it because concurrency, it works 10,000 times, 100,000 times, but then it fails. So how do you deal with that?
This was actually something came up when we did our talk years ago. People saying, how do you test multi-threaded stuff? And I don't know if you've got any better ideas now, but we said good test coverage and a brute force approach that just do it with tools like Thread Sanitizer. And if you do it every time you commit and you run half an hour's worth of tests, you'll probably get errors showing up relatively quickly. So I think it is possible.
It's also, there's ways to write multi-threaded code where each individual thread is testable and is essentially self-contained. It's when you're doing threads that are doing this, interacting with each other, that the problems come in. And I would suggest that there's a problem in your architectural design if you're doing that.
Yeah, I would say changing the way you write multi-threaded code definitely helps.
I think if you have multi-threaded code, then your goal is not 0 bugs. Your goal is like the probability of a data race being there being very low. That's your goal. And by doing brute force tests, you're really making the probability go down very, very low. Because, I mean, I do the same. I have a brute force CI that runs it for an hour or two or even the whole night. I mean, the probability of there still being a data race there is pretty low. I mean, it could still be there. But that's something I'd be comfortable to ship out to customers.
Yeah, I think shipping code is all about confidence, right? And testing improves that confidence.
And on a practical level, if you do get an actual bug, which is a data race, go and write a test that reproduces the bug and then fix the bug and then leave the test in.
That should be, any bug should start with writing the test that reproduces it.
But for race condition bugs, it's often I never thought of testing that. But then to actually write a convoluted test that actually does manage to trigger it can be quite difficult, but useful because then you've got a real edge case test.
One quick final comment from me. If you have an open source project, having tests is a really good way for people to report bugs. If you can say to someone, write a failing test and then I can fix it instantly, that really is a better way to deal with things. There's one quick question online, but we're going to have to move on to the next question very soon.
Yes, exactly. Just making sure. What's your favorite testing framework?
Catch 2.
Catch? I don't care. I use the JUCE one because it's in our code base anyway.
Yeah, I wrote a new one for Chalk because I needed one with no dependencies, and it's literally 10 lines of code, and that's all I need.
I do like
Is this true?
The look of...
Yes, no, assert.
Is it Chris Jusiak? Do you know him? He's written a test framework that looks quite nice. You've not seen it? It's all done with user-defined literals and things, so it's very terse. Okay, next topic. We have code reviews. Ship it versus thorough code reviews. I think that's the next one, isn't it? Okay. Again, you entered this, so maybe you should start.
Okay, so I think we can approach it from different angles, right? The angles I would be interested in is how much do you nitpick out of people? Where's the line? Secondly, who performs code reviews? Is it a tech lead or is it everyone? And what's the third one? How particular are you about the process? So do you need to get 2 reviews to be able to merge 1 review, no review? Is it just suggestions? Do you wait for everybody or not? I don't know, stuff like that. How much you care about.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of that will depend how big your team is and the structure of and the kind of and the people in it really, because if it's a tiny team with all equally skilled people, it's different to a big team with juniors and seniors and.
Yeah.
So if those are the topics, where do you sit on each?
Okay, so let's start maybe from this. let's start from the less obvious one, like who gives code reviews, right? So I think encouraging people to give code reviews, especially I'd say if they're new to the code base or they're more junior, is very beneficial for them to learn more about the code base or like learn about the practices using in the code so they can write a more coherent chunk of code that they're contributing. So I think this is good. It's something I wasn't used to necessarily before joining Ableton, for instance. And as soon as I joined Ableton, I was like being asked to do a lot of code reviews, and I was like, okay, should I be like, I don't even know. And it's like, it's super beneficial, right? To like encourage you to start reading this code. So yeah, but there are some people who, so imagine being like the main maintainer of the project. You put your heart in there, you put like your ideas in there, you're very opinionated about your ideas. Do you step away from giving a code review and letting other people merge it? I think it's difficult for many people. Do you like let go when you're the tech lead?
I think that's an argument that there's I think that implies there's a structural problem in the team because nobody should own the code. It's the team's code. So everybody should be giving reviews, and reviews should be about learning. And yes, it's valuable for junior team members to learn through code reviews, but it's also valuable for seniors to be exposed to new ideas. We had, I don't know if he's here, but Leon joined our team, and the first code review he did, he made a comment about a new C++ feature that I hadn't heard of, and it was like, that's brilliant. Everybody has their own knowledge, and sharing that with the team is the most important thing.
How do you deal with gatekeepers?
There shouldn't be gatekeepers.
Yeah, but when there's one, what do you do?
We, I don't know, I don't want to make Focusrite sound like a nirvana, but I haven't met that person within our engineering teams yet. Our engineering teams are really open. So it's like, if you make a comment in a pull request, it's like, the expectation is that you're doing it in a way that is intended to improve the code base. It's never a personal attack, and if it is, then we need to have a conversation with that person. But conversely, code reviews, there's an expectation that they're thorough. So nothing goes into develop until we are like, as a team, we're saying that this is the code we want to ship to users. But yeah, it should be collegiate, and it should be about learning and not about gatekeeping and not about personalities and not about pushing an agenda. That's just bad.
Do you feel it can slow things down a bit if you kind of make sure any number of people get their code review in, or does it just become frictionless and seamless?
You need to get your card size down then. If your code review is that big that it takes that long to review, it implies the work you're bringing in is too big, and you need to. I mean, ideally, I like code reviews that are like one line. I'm fixing this. This is why it's changed. There you go. And you can look at it and understand the whole context immediately. What I hate is when you go to like GitHub and it's like, number of files changed, 800. And you're just like, God, that's my day gone then. Well, that should
Doesn't
be
even start to cover it.
Genuine comment though about spaces versus tabs. The biggest thing that improved our pull request processing was having Clang format run automatically on the code base on save, because then it means there's no debate about styling. What you start to discuss is architecture and functionality.
So I don't know. This isn't really this question, but I do think styling imparts meaning into your code. So the way you space it out, the way you align stuff, can tell you a lot about what's going on.
That's fine when it's you and Jules. When it's 20 people in a team or 50 people in a team, you need a consistent. So a good example that we're literally dealing with now is we've got a code base that's using snake case and a code base that's using camel case. And we're finding that subtle bugs slip in because of naming conventions, because of different standards. So one of the things we're trying to do is standardize across it and stop the conversation being about, should there be a tab, an indent there? Should there be, this naming format? It's like, that's all decided beforehand, and it's applied by a tool, and the tool repeatedly will do the same thing.
What can the tool can't do snake case and camel case, can it?
Clang Tidy can.
Oh, it can.
Probably
Oh,
yeah.
that's-
So I mean, this goes back to your original point. Is that considered nitpicking if you're complaining about
think so,
spacing?
because I would take it further to be like, I was like sort of convincing people to prepend their comment with words opinion or fact. You know, are you talking about like, did you benchmark it and it actually makes sense, or is it your preference? And if it's your preference, why is your preference more important than my preference? Or is it about coherence of the code? Well, let's have linters and never talk about it again. Is it about like your personal opinion? I don't know. I'm open to being persuaded, but like I'll merge. If it's an opinion, I'll merge.
I
and we
think
can talk about this later. Like, you know what I mean?
I think the thing is, though, that there's an opinion which is not your opinion or anyone else on the team's opinion. It's the collective opinion. And what I find is, what I see as a code smell is when I'm looking through some code and I see a little bit in there and I go, oh, I know who wrote that. You know, that bit's, you know, you blur your eyes, you can see, oh, so-and-so wrote that bit there. That's a bad thing. You should be able to take any part of your code and go, any of us could have written that.
Yeah, but I agree with the direction towards like linters and stuff, because actually
But linters won't. It's
Sure.
more than a linter.
Yeah, fair enough. Or like
It's a more subtle thing than a linter is.
And to be fair, if this is something that we all agreed on, and this is how we do things, I would not argue with that. Also because there's something like we don't maybe actively think about every day, but when we're exposed to the same code every day and read it, if we keep the same practices, it reduces our cognitive load when you open a different file, right? So totally. And then it's just like catches the eye, you know what's happening. So like I would be completely in favor of having coherent practices.
Okay, we're gonna have to speed it on because we've done 3 topics and we've got 10 minutes left.
Okay. Very quick one.
Very quickly.
So one of our developers has visual impairment, and she commented recently that in code bases where there's a consistent style and consistent formatting, she can get up to speed like that. Anytime there's a difference, it throws her cognitive ability out. And it's really hard for her after that.
But I would still find like it important to state the reasoning you're asking for a change.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got fairly split here. So 30% of people think just ship it, don't worry about.
Yeah, I think those are the people who write open source libraries.
Probably. Okay, let's see what we're going to talk about next, if it will load. Oh, no. There we go. Plugin format successor. I think that's next. Okay, let's try and do this quick fire so we can fit in a few more topics. So the formats we've got here are clap, C major. I don't know if, is that, have you got a format? VST3, and then that's LV2, I think. So do we think any of these is going to take over from, I guess Audio Unit and VST3 are the current standard. What do we think about clap? That's a good one to start. You've spoken a lot about plugin formats in the past, Fabian. What are your thoughts?
I don't like any of the plugin formats. I was really hopeful for clap, and then, it's definitely a good proposal, and I haven't looked at it in that detail, but I already saw some things. So next year, I'm definitely going to give a talk of what do all the plugin formats do wrong.
Okay. And then write your own.
No, but because I'll just do more mistakes. But yeah, so I don't want to go into details, but there's just things that I always see as an eyesore looking at any of these plugin formats.
I think whatever's the minimum common denominator amongst all of them, that's the format that people will write to because they know that it's supported across all the standards. So it's like VST2 kind of won because that was the minimum. It's like, if you sell 2 computers, one's got like 10 mega RAM and one's got, 6 mega RAM, everybody's going to develop for the 6 meg because it's definitely going to run on the 10 meg. So it's like, we'll always develop for the minimum feature set.
And I think that's what clap does have going for it, in that it's very minimal by kind of default. There's very little you have to implement to get a plugin up and running, and everything's done through extensions.
But haven't Ableton already said they're not going to support it? Doesn't that make it DOA?
Well, they might change their minds. I don't know.
Well, it'll take about 5 or 6 years before they give a decision. I mean, I like Clap. I think I like what they're doing with it. I've not looked into in detail in there. I think I had a quick look through the code and realized that they'd used some really generic file names that are going to cause include problems for people, and then I just moved on. But I like overall, I like what they're trying to do, and I like the event loop-based approach they've taken. That's really sensible. The fact that everything's extensions makes me think that maybe that's a terrible idea, because then you're going to have this mismatch of whether extend. I don't know, I wish them all the best. I really hope it goes somewhere. I think
it's quite good design, but there will be some standard extensions that everyone supports.
Yeah, but then what it'll end up is that's all you'll be able to do. Because like I say, there's always going to be a lowest common denominator, no matter what this format is. So whatever the minimum clap is, if that wins the format battle, it'll be that minimum extensionless thing will be what we do.
Which of these does JUCE support?
VST3 and LV2.
So they're already winning.
Yeah. Well, VST3, it's not really a successor. I guess by that I was saying, is that just going to win out because it has gained such a big share now? Are any of the others going to disrupt it? LV2's been out a long time and hasn't really destroyed VST3, even though it's open, it's extension-based.
What I think might move the needle would be if Clap could, I don't know if they're doing it, but if they did something where you could build a Clap plugin and automatically get the VST3 and the AU and the AX out of it without doing any work, that could actually then people might start going, oh, I'll just write it in Clap and then get the others anyway.
Of course, the other thing that's different about Clap, I think, is the governance, whereas VST is company-owned. Clap is an open source thing, so you're not beholden to a company that might change their minds.
I noticed this is C major, isn't it? The second one. You haven't bigged up your own plugin format.
Well, that would be undignified.
So we do have some results here. It's pretty even, actually. Majority think VST3 probably because it's established, but a lot of people on the C major bandwagon.
Wow. It's
and
not even a plugin.
A lot of people excited about Clap as well. Okay, let's go to the next topic. This doesn't sort them, which is kind of annoying. So I think we've got a split decision here. We can look at maintainability versus performance or package managers.
I don't know much about them.
Does anyone know a lot about package managers? Because I don't.
I do, but it's going to be a really boring thing to talk about.
Let's do the other one.
Yeah.
Let's do the other one. Maintainability versus performance. Okay, if we can get this done in like 2.5 minutes, we can have one more topic. Who's going to kick us off? Should you write code for it to be maintainable in the future, or should it, whilst sacrificing performance potentially?
Yeah, or
should you
both.
always focus on performance?
Or both. Why not both?
Always optimize when it's a problem. Ignore Jules. Yeah. Only optimize when it's a problem.
So maybe, what do you think should be prioritized more often?
Maintainability.
I agree with you, 100%, right?
I'm on that. But it kind of depends what you're doing. If you're doing something that really is no use unless it goes really fast, then you...
Exactly.
But that's rare. And even in a project where it does have to be super fast, that's probably still only a little bit of your code base.
Also, how have you identified that? Because most people do it by gut, not by actually telling them that is the line of code.
It's funny you should say that, Paul, because I might be giving a talk tomorrow on this.
I have this anecdote that I sometimes give, that like, as a young programmer, I was very excited about these like little tricks. Like, I'm an avid Vim user, and I like, such in place always with like some Vim regex and stuff like that. Like, it's like, I just like this stuff. So I was using regex a lot when I was working as a web developer for like all validation and stuff like that, right? It's like fast, it's good, it works. But I went so deep in a way that my regex expressions were so cryptic, nobody knew how to maintain it. And after I quit the company, my old colleagues told me that they wrap my expressions in like 3 conditional statements because nobody even knew how to touch it. So like, I thought I was prioritizing performance because when you're learning how to code, everybody's about that. Always look at the performance, always look at this. We don't so all of us agree we should, most of the time, prioritize maintainability, but it's not what we're taught. This is not what we talk about. We have all these talks about performance. What are the talks about maintainability, like self-documenting code, readability, and stuff like that? Like,
there are some. If you go to more of the C++ conferences, you'll get those talks. But
I think the perception is that maintainability is easy and is like people's default, whereas performance is hard, and you need to learn about that. But I think you're right. Maintainability is actually a skill that is learned over time, and to get a code base that people can work on for a long period of time is a skill worth teaching. Okay, any more quick thoughts, or I'm going to go on to this? Yeah, see, overwhelming. People no one cares about performance anymore. Computers are fast enough. Okay, one more quick, we're going to skip package managers, I think. Do we want to talk about documentation for the last?
Yeah.
For the last 2 minutes? Okay, so you might have to clarify this because, again, this was one of yours that was added, and I wasn't quite sure where you were going, so I thought one of the distinctions I see often is you get either comments written in code, like the JUCE kind of style, or you get a library that's shipped with a huge PDF separately.
Or no code, or no documentation.
Or just no documentation.
Because the code like reads itself, right?
Okay. So which do you prefer?
No documentation.
Yeah. I mean, that's the dream.
It's the dream, right?
It's the dream. That's what we're all going
Right.
for, really, in our utopia. Yeah.
If you're not writing a library, your code should be self-documenting.
If you are writing a library, it should be. I mean, what's the difference?
It should,
Why is that
but
different?
because for a library, I may need to look something up and actually understand more detailed context than you can give in a variable name, potentially. Especially when you're dealing with something that's cross-platform, and the behaviors might be slightly different. But yeah,
So
no comments.
why is there a difference between writing a library and writing code? Because when you're writing code, still your team has to consume that. They have to be able to understand it. Your team is just different if it's a library because it's any consumers of the library.
Yes, but you're not in control of the library.
Okay,
It's
come
like-
to... Oh, sorry.
No,
sorry,
no,
sorry.
go,
No,
go.
no, sorry.
If it's your library, you are.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Let's say you have a group of people actively maintaining a code base, and you want to always have up-to-date documentation. So like you maybe compromise the readability of the code, like good naming and so on, but like, oh, you just documented it. How do you assure the documentation is up-to-date?
Yeah, I mean, that's the killer for this guy. I think this question's quite easy as it's written, because like, is anyone in favor of keeping a separate chunk of documentation outside the code?
Well, what about like introduction to the code base? Like I find like there's some document, if you're a new person.
That's a tutorial, it's not a...
Yeah, to be honest, I don't like it when they're separate because they get out of date very quickly. And it would be nice, I mean, you can kind of do it with Oxygen, but still it's a separate thing that you have to go and maintain.
But yeah, whereas when you have a library and you're in control of like, you release a version or whatever, I would expect people to assure it's up-to-date always and stuff like that, right? But like when you don't tend to prioritize it so much when you actively develop it and you're not really, maybe you should, I'm not saying this. But
I think the most
I don't
annoying
wanna
thing
write it.
is when you use a library and you do jump to definition and there's nothing there. And there clearly should be some documentation. I think that's the worst.
I mean, I was just going to say, because in CMake we've just done the standard library from scratch, and we've just actually written the documentation generator to pull the comments out and generate the documentation rather than write it all separately. That's how strongly we felt that that's the right way around.
Because it's much more likely going to be maintained, at least if it lives next to the code. Okay, so one quick, pushing further into code should be self-documenting. Are you in favor of using types and enums and things where you wouldn't perhaps because they give more information about something?
100%, yes. Wrap everything that reads better. And also even prefer longer function names to misleading function names. If it says it does one thing, like add value, and I would expect it to have something you're adding the value to and the value you're adding, right then. But if it actually does that in the code and something else, assigns it to something, whatever, it's a bad name maybe. It's like always be clear about what it does and stuff like that. This would be then prioritized, right?
Naming is hard. I think we're about out of time. Let's just look at the results of this one quickly. Yeah, so most people would prefer to read inline documentation. Quick show of hands, because this is all I can do in the room. Who would prefer no documentation and the code being self-documented?
Well, we'd prefer it, but
not many people. A lot of people
practical.
like to read a block of comments.
Yeah.
This is something I've noticed with Traction Engine is people write back, even with code that's very terse. It's a small class. They say, where's the documentation? I'm like, well, you can see what it does. There's tests and everything.
I prefer people not asking me to write documentation. That's all I'm asking.
The only time you need docs really is for assembly, because that's just impenetrable.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me on the panel. Thank you for the audience for participating. It really makes it worthwhile.